Alright, how's it going everybody? My name is Infamous Isaac and I'm here with a video on Bleach, the Thousand Year Blood War Part 2. Over the past year on my channel, I've been covering all of Bleach in terms of the anime from the very beginning up until Part 1, which came out back in December of 2022. So, now with Part 2 being done and it joining Part 1 in the annals of history, it's time for me to cover it now that we're waiting for Part 3, which is probably going to take a while, I'll be honest. So, without further ado, I'm going to go into the non-spoilers first, and then into the spoilers, and then you guys can tell me down below what you think of this part. So without further ado, let's begin. So to kick off my non-spoiler review, I want to say that in my terms of enjoyment, I thought that this part was a 6.5 to a 7. It's not a dip in quality compared to part 1. Matter of fact, it probably looks even better or on par to that part. But to me, I just didn't enjoy it as much. I thought that the animation was phenomenal. I thought that the music was just as great as the last part. I thought that the characters and their voice actors were great, but it just didn't match how I felt about part 1. Like for instance, with part 1, I felt like I was invested in almost every single episode. But with part 2, I could only really name a few, matter of fact, a handful of episodes that really had me engaged. And the ones that I liked, I thought were good, but the ones that were above the rest were amazing. That part of the show remains the same for sure. The best way to summarize the way I feel is that it feels like Bleach, for better or for worse. And with the original anime, I had the parts that I liked about that, but with this, part 1 just felt nothing like Bleach in a good way. It felt so improved upon that it felt rejuvenating and different. But part 2 doesn't really have that for me. It just feels like, oh yeah, we're just back to Bleach now. Whether it's with some of the fights, some of the ways the characters are acting, or just the pacing. With the original anime having a really slow, snail-paced pacing, this one is moving really fast to the point where I feel like I don't even know some of the characters' names or have any attachment to what's going on in some points. And the show isn't aided by the weekly release schedule, which nothing can be done about that. All you can really do is just binge the show now that it's over. But it definitely didn't help my interpretation of it. But despite my personal grievances, I still would recommend part 2. Maybe a little less than part 1, but no matter what, if you're a Bleach fan and you haven't seen or read Thousand Year Blood War, which I haven't, I still enjoyed this part and can't wait for part 3. Because when everything's said and done, you can't take for granted that this happening is such a rarity in the anime space. Getting a continuation of this quality, no less, is still such a blessing that we just can't overlook and have to be thankful that it exists. And that's not to say that criticism isn't necessary for something like this, because other shows can learn from this and try to improve that format. But I feel like any hate directed towards it, like any other show that gets hate for no reason, it's just people overlooking what is being done here. This is unprecedented. But again, it's a 6.5 to a solid 7. I still enjoyed it, so I don't want to discourage people from watching this. And I may be alone in this opinion. I saw a lot of positive feedback about this season, so I think it just might be me. But let me know down below what you think about this season. Put a spoiler tag if you are going to go into spoilers, but if not, just talk about it generally. But now we're going to move on into the spoiler section of this video. So, as per usual, know that I will be going into spoilers for Bleach, the Thousand Year Blood War Part 2. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this, then I recommend leaving now. You already heard my non-spoiler opinions of it, so if you want to go watch it, you can watch it. If you want to come back, you can come back, but know that my video will always be here. So without further ado, let's get into the story. So this is going to sound reductive when I say this, but I'm going to summarize the story as best as I can. So in the beginning, Ichigo is training with Squad 0, while Yhwach decides to launch another invasion against the Serete. So while all that's going on, we get to see a bunch of fights in the Serete, like Kenpachi coming back, like Rukia and Byakuya coming back and getting to fight together, like Renji coming back, and just a bunch of the Gote 13 getting their salty run back against the Stern Ritters. And after the invasion is well on its way, Yhwach decides to go up to Squad 0 while Ichigo comes down to the Serete. And so Yhwach is now fighting Ichibei Hyosebe, while some of his Stern Ritters are fighting the other members of Squad 0. And then Yhwach uses Oswalton, which takes all the reishi from his army and gives it to him and the Stern Ritters, which revives some of them, which unlocks the power that they weren't able to use before, so now they're major threats. And with the end of this part being Yhwach being killed by Ichibei, and that ending the part. And an important thing to make note of, Uryu is with Yhwach now. He defected from Ichigo's group and decided to join him because of his Quincy heritage. And so now he's with Hashswalth and Yhwach, raiding the Squad Zero base. And one of the biggest things I didn't like about this part was that Ichigo was such an afterthought in his own story. We didn't get to see his training with Ichibei, and when he showed up in the Sarite, he got to fight once, which to be honest was barely a fight because Ichigo was just taking care of all of them. But then Ichigo has to go up to Squad Zero because Yhwach that went up there, so now he has to take care of him. He's going with Yoruichi, Chad, and Orihime, which by the way, those two, they just are barely in the story at this point. They were in Hueco Mundo, then they came over here, but they don't have a role, as big of a role as they did in the other parts of the story at least. So it just sucks to see that Ichigo didn't have as big of a role to play in this part compared to the first part, which why I love the first part so much, because half of the season was getting to see the Sarite being invaded, and then the other half was seeing Ichigo come to terms with and learn his power and his heritage. That's why I really enjoyed it. So seeing this here, it's just more like, we're just fighting. And that's not to say that there weren't parts of the story that I found interesting or enjoyed. It's just more that since this was all mostly taking place in the same place, compared to last season, there just wasn't much variety in what we were looking at compared to Squad Zero later on in the season, and then having the Sarite, which I thought was a great balance. But for most of the season, it was just the Sarite. The episodes that I really enjoyed were Heart of a Wolf, Rages at the Ringside, The White Haze, and the last 3 episodes of the season, because all those episodes that I listed gave me that same feeling, or at the very least a similar feeling to part 1, where I was just baffled, amazed, and astonished by what I was looking at. Especially Heart of a Wolf. Good lord, that episode was amazing. The ones I didn't like were March of the Zombies. I thought those 2 episodes, they just weren't for me. I genuinely did not like them. Then it was the episode where Ichigo showed up. I don't remember if that was a part of an episode that I did like, but I didn't like that moment because I thought it was just so whack. Then there's also the I Am the Edge, which a lot of people did like, but it just wasn't for me. I thought Kenpachi showing up, like, oh, this is so cool, like it's Kenpachi being a dog again, and I thought that part was cool, but the guy that he was fighting, I thought was just like, in concept, his power was cool, but the fight itself was just, it was alright to me. It wasn't anything crazy. I also don't like what they were doing with Bambi later on in the season, and some of the Stern Ritters I thought were cool, like the blonde hair girl, but overall, I thought they were just okay. But I really did enjoy Squad Zero and seeing them fight, especially Ichibei. I thought he was so cool. And episode 10 or 11, I think, where Ichibei and Yhwach were talking, I thought overall was just such a cool scene, and it set up so well for the fight over the next 2 episodes. Overall, amazing fight. And overall, while part 2 had some enjoyable moments for me, I felt like part 1 just consistently, I enjoyed it a lot more. But if you're still hesitant about continuing watching this part, know that the quality is still amazing and that it will only get better from here. No matter how I feel about the story or some of the fights, I still really enjoyed watching it because it is one of the highest quality shows out there right now, besides like maybe One Piece and Jujutsu Kaisen. But overall, again, I think it's a solid 7. If you have any opinions or if you agree or disagree, let me know down below, because I feel like my opinion's a little different from what usually people think about this part, so I don't know if I'm just being weird or if people do agree with me, so let me know down below. But until then, hope you all enjoyed. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Until next time, peace.